Hello, everyone. We all know the Russia-Ukraine war has been raging on for almost 3 years now. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives. People have lost their livelihoods. People have been forced to be displaced. And still the conflict is nowhere near ending. Now, a lot has been discussed of late, and the narrative that was created, say maybe in 2020, about how Russia was the aggressor and how they attack Ukraine. Now all of that is actually changing. In fact, many people are not seeing Russia as the aggressor. Here we have RFK Jr., who has the best condensed explanation for the Russia-Ukraine war. So let's just hear him out.
Was invaded 3 times through Ukraine. The last time Hitler killed 1 out of every 7 Russians. They don't want to have Ukraine join NATO. So when the wall came down in the Soviet Union, Europe, Gorbachev destroyed himself politically by doing something that was very, very courageous. He went to Bush and he said, I'm going to allow you to reunify Germany under a NATO army. I'm going to remove 450,000 Soviet troops, but I want your commitment. After that, you will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And we solemnly swore we wouldn't do it. Well, then in 97, it's a big...
Okay, so NATO was formed in 1948, and the Warsaw Pact, I think, was signed in 1955. So essentially, the Warsaw Pact was signed to sort of counter the NATO. So there were multiple countries who signed the Warsaw Pact along with Russia. And the idea was to keep NATO at bay, keep them in the Western European region, with France, Germany, Italy. So that's why the Warsaw Pact was signed, first of all. But then again, the Warsaw Pact, it sort of got dissolved after 1990s, 92 maybe, I think. Right after the fall of Soviet Union. That just opened up a whole new playing field for NATO and for CIA and for MI6. And now we can see what has happened.
Brzezinski was the first in the neocon said, we're going to move NATO 1,000 miles to the east and take 15 countries into it and surround the Soviet Union. So then we not only move it into 14 new nations, but we unilaterally walk away from our 2 nuclear weapons treaties with the Russians. And we put Aegis missile systems in Romania and Poland, 12 minutes from Moscow. When Russians did that to Cuba in 62, we came this close to nuclear war until they removed them. So the Russians don't want nukes 400 miles from Moscow. We then overthrow the Ukraine government. In 2014, their elected government.
Many people might not know this, but Ukraine had been going through a lot of problems, in that time period, 2012, starting from 2010, I think. From 2010 onwards till 2015, there has been a lot of infighting within the Ukrainian system.
And put in a Western sympathetic government. Russia then has to go into Crimea because
this
they
was
have
in
a port. It's
2015,
their only warm water
16.
port. And they know the new government that we just installed is going to invite the U.S. Navy into their port. So Russia then went into Crimea without firing a shot because the people of...
I remember the news item that came out of Crimea at the time was that the little green men have taken over. So basically, the Russian soldiers were the little green men, so to speak. And the people living in Crimea, they also think of themselves as Russians. And so you had all these videos of, masked up soldiers, totally geared up, and they are showing off their weapons to the Crimean children and all. I remember those videos from 2016, 2015, something like that.
Crimea are Russian. Then the new Ukrainian government we installed started killing ethnic Russians in Donbass and Lugansk, and they voted to leave and join Russia. Putin said, I don't want them. Let's give them protection and give them semi-autonomy and make an agreement to keep NATO out of Ukraine.
Okay, this I was not aware of, so I can't really comment on that. But RFK Jr., he has worked in that region for a long time, right? So obviously he knows much more about what's going on in there. So we'll have to take his word for it. But at the same time, I think we should also keep in mind that the Ukrainian system, I think, has been hijacked by, these neocons and neo-Nazis, basically. The Russians have been blaming the Ukrainians of, resorting to, of, getting into bed with the Nazis, with the neo-Nazis. And I have seen some truly horrifying videos coming out of these, you know, the warfare that's going on, which were all created by these so-called neo-Nazis. And they're horrifying.
Ukraine. That treaty was written by Germany, France, Russia, and England, the Minsk Accords. And the Ukrainian
Yes, of
parliament, which
course.
is controlled by ultra-rightists, and that's a nice way of talking about them, refused to sign it. Zelensky runs in 2019.
Mm.
He's an actor. Why did he get elected with 70% of the vote? Because he promised to sign the Minsk Accords. He promised peace. He gets in there and he pivots. Nobody can explain why, but we know why. Because he was threatened with death by ultra-rightists in his government and a withdrawal of support by the United States by Victoria Nuland, who's the leading neocon in the State Department. We told him he could not sign it. So then the Russians go in. They don't send a big army. They only send 40,000 people. It's a nation of 44 million people. They clearly do not intend to conquer Ukraine. But they want us back at the negotiating table. We won't allow Zelensky to go back. So he goes to Israel and Turkey and says, will you please help me negotiate a treaty? The Russians just want a guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO. Zelensky signs the treaty. Putin's people sign the treaty. And Putin starts withdrawing the Russian troops in good faith. And what happens? Joe Biden sends Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, over to Ukraine in April and forces him to tear up the treaty. And since then, 450,000 kids have died who none of them should have died. For every one Russian that dies, 5 to 8 Ukrainians die, and they don't have any men left. We're giving them all these weapons, but they don't have men left. It's a catastrophe, and we look kind of like the aggressor. That's the way the rest of the world sees us.
Yeah, that's the way the rest of the world sees the Americans, because the conflict would have never reached these levels that it reached. And there were talks going on in the early phases of the war. I mean, he just said it himself. And both Putin and Zelensky decided to sign a pact so that all of this would stop. And that was the time when the Biden administration sent in Boris Johnson. And there was a huge meet and greet between Boris Johnson and Zelensky. This was in 2018 or 2020. And from, I'm confusing the dates a little bit. I think this was 2021, in fact, I think. And that's when, everything went to shit. And so the Russians had already been amassing their troops. They had 40,000 troops, but they were amassing much more. And that's when, the war just blew up from like end 2021 end. So by 2022 February, it had already blown up, right? All these areas, Donbass and Lugansk, those were the areas that were first attacked, and then it went on to the Zaporizhia and Dnipro and all the other areas. So again, as long as people are making profits, as long as the warmongers are making profits, as long as the weapons manufacturers are making profits, this war is not good. So let's see if this new administration, Donald, uh, President Donald Trump's administration, if they are able to make a change. So let's see what happens.